Chapter 4. Sunk deep into his swivel chair, feet cocked over a spur-scratched desk, bandana draped over his face to discourage the flies, the sheriff was dozing when the prim figure of Phyllis Ford darkened the doorway. An apologetic cough jerked him into wakefulness. His eyes ran over the girl's placid features and smudged with perspiration. He noted the droop of her slim shoulders and the weariness in her eyes. "Sit down, ma'am," he invited hastily, swinging his long legs off the desk. He pulled a straight-backed chair forward, and the girl sank into it with an involuntary sigh. A right pretty gal, if she'd take off the blinkers and get rid of that old maid's dress, he decided. Aloud, he said, "I reckon you're Miss Ford, Pete's niece?" The girl fished a small mirror out of a black leather handbag and dabbed her dust-smeared face with a tiny handkerchief, which had been evidently used aplenty on the stage. "Did you ever see such a sight?" she murmured, poking a stray curl at a sight under the bonnet. "I've seen worse, ma'am. Stage travel, it's heck on women." She replaced the mirror and fumbled in her bag. "I received your letter, Mr. Stevens, but I don't really understand. You say that Peter Ford, my uncle, is dead and willed a gold mine to me, but now it's lost. How can it be lost, and what caused Uncle's death?" Her blue eyes fastened upon him in puzzlement. Pat cleared his throat. "Well, ma'am, answering the last first, Pete was murdered. As for losing the mine, I reckon he got his locations tangled up." The sheriff told of finding the prospector's body in the map and the fruitless search for the mine. "Did you catch the murderer?" "Not yet," returned the sheriff quietly. "May I see the map?" "You can have it, ma'am. It's all yours." The sheriff fingered through a sheaf of papers in a drawer and produced the creased sheet of paper. The girl examined it closely. "It seems very plain and neatly drawn. Perhaps you lost your way?" The sheriff smiled. "Well, maybe, but we checked the landmarks." "This is terribly disappointing." The girl's voice was low. "My parents are quite poor, and they depend upon me for support. I've burned my bridges behind me and spent almost every dollar I have saved to get here." Moisture was quite close to her blue eyes. "Pete left a sack of high-grade ore over at the Gold Eagle," put in Pat hastily. He sensed the girl's loneliness and disappointment. "Reckon that'll give you plenty of credit, and they can use a schoolmarm bad here at Hopewell." "But I don't teach school. I'm a librarian." "Well, maybe we could start a library. There's sure an ignorant bunch of mavericks located around here at Dutch Springs." She smiled. "You won't have to. I've decided to search for the mine." For a moment the sheriff was too astounded to reply. He struggled to keep a straight face. "You ever packed into wild country, ma'am?" he inquired gravely. "Oh, no, the land is all cultivated around Gateville, but I've been on picnics to the lake. I've heard a lot about Colorado." "Miss Ford," Pat's voice was forceful, "get the notion of prospecting for Mirage Mine out of your head. You can't handle it. Men have spent their lives hunting for the Mirage and died in those barrens. There's no water, it's hotter than blazes, and there's mountain lion, coyotes, rattlesnakes, tarantulas around, not to speak of hydrophobia skunks and horny toads. That just ain't woman's country."
"But we have the map."
There was a note of insistence in her clear voice. "Well, it ain't worth a hoot."
"I think it is. Uncle wouldn't have misled me."
You ever meet Pete?
No, but I sent him a greeting card every Christmas, and I knitted him socks.
The kind of a girl that would, thought Pat. Ma'am, he returned patiently, you don't know the bairns. They're plumb poison. You go rest up a while, then maybe we'll rustle you a job, but our Pete's sure'll be getting you home again. Phyllis Ford's blue eyes frozen. They reminded the sheriff of Pete's. The stubborn old desert rat would never quit when he had set his mind upon a thing.
I don't want a job, she said firmly, and I don't want to go home. I'd be ridiculed by the whole town. Besides, I've held jobs as long as I can remember, and I hate them. I'll search for Uncle's mine if it's the last thing I do.
Pat sighed. This pale-faced girl sure was difficult. Well, there was one way to prove she couldn't tackle the bairns. Just let her try. Just as you say, ma'am, he returned soberly. But you'll be needing a guide.
Yes, she agreed, slowly eyeing the map. I'd probably lose my way. I really haven't a great sense of direction.
And you two could live and sleep out in the mountains together for days and maybe weeks, continued the sheriff.
Without a chaperone?
It was a horrid squeal. You bet. There ain't no other way.
Perhaps I could hire a woman companion.
There's no women in Powder Valley who'd go gallivanting around the Cumbrullas, said Pat grimly.
Very well, then.
A small foot tapped the floor impatiently.
I'll go alone. Could you recommend a thoroughly reputable guide?
The sheriff rasped his chin, thinking fast. One night on the trail, with sight of a few rattler snakes and maybe a couple of them coyotes a howling, could chase all the notions of hunting gold out of this eastern's head. Let a lizard scuttle over her blankets or a mountain lion scream, and she'd be hightailing her for town pronto. Yes, ma'am. There was a sadistic glint in Pat's grey eyes. I got the very man. Bill Williams, well, sure he sure knows the bairns. He rose, lifted a huge key ring off a peg, and stepped through the doorway. Phyllis was at his heels. The Hose Grow in Dutch Springs was a dumpy adobe structure set a short distance behind the courthouse, far enough so that the drunks and fine there could not disturb the county officials in their offices. Pat crossed a stretch of level ground, the girl's quick steps tapping behind him. He swung open the heavy iron-barred door of the jail and stepped inside. The light was dim after the sun glare from outside. 3 steel-barred cells stood on each side of the wide passageway. All were vacant except one. At the rasp of the opening door, a thick-set young rider in blue shirt and corduroys glanced up from a hand of solitaire he was carefully laying out upon his bunk. Bill Williams' craggy features were tanned to a rich mahogany, and imps of recklessness danced in his smoky eyes. There was laughter, wrinkles around the corner of his wide mouth, and his short curly hair had a copperish tinge. His whole appearance held a you-be-damned challenge that was a reminiscence of a friendly bull-terrier. Bill, said the sheriff, stepping to one side to allow the girl to answer, I want you to make acquaintance of Miss Phyllis Ford. The rider rose uncertainly upon his slightly bowed legs. It was apparent that the width of his shoulders made him appear shorter than he actually was. Glad to know you, ma'am, he mumbled, shooting a questioning glance over at the sheriff. There was a twinkle in Pat's eyes. Bill, Miss Ford wants a guide. She craves to go hunting for Pete's mine, and I figure you'd fit the bill. The girl's startled eyes shuddered from the steel bars to Bill's sun-scorched features, and then back to the sheriff.
But,
she gasped,
This is a prison. That man's a criminal.
Oh, Bill's all wool and a yard wide. A good trail man and fast with the gun. Well, maybe too dang fast if you ask me. Pat frowned at the prisoner, then continued. But he's steady as a workhorse, except when he hits the red eye and starts a fracas. Right now he's booked for being drunk and disorderly and threatened to salivate Tom Rik Straw. There's no saloons out there in the barrens.
He does look awfully strong and capable.
The girl approached the cell cautiously and eyed the rider as though he was Exhibit A or a new species of beetle. The prisoner fidgeted uneasily and glanced appealingly towards Pat.
I really think he'll do, declared Phyllis thoughtfully. If you recommend him, Mr. Stevens.
Bill, he'd fight a mountain lion with his arms tied, when he's drunk, declared the sheriff soberly. He ain't so much when he's sober, but there ain't a better man in a tight spot. Bill glared at Pat and growled under his breath. It's a deal, then, declared the sheriff. Let's go. The girl stepped outside. Hey! Yelled Bill as the sheriff followed, but Pat merely grinned and slammed the door. Outside, Phyllis turned to the sheriff.
Mr. Williams didn't say he'd accept the position.
Pat could have sworn her eyes were twinkling, but put it down to the light reflecting on her spectacles. Oh, don't you worry your head about that, ma'am. You just go over to that hotel and get some rest. Bill's just busting to grab the job. Pat watched her slight form disappear round the corner of the courthouse and then re-entered the jail. What's the big idea? Demanded Bill Williams. This ain't no moosum. Bringing schoolmarms in here to look me over? He crooked his forefingers into circles and raised them to his eyes.
Dear, dear, he's a criminal,
he mimicked. You ain't running no sandy over me, Pat Stevens. I ain't riding herd on that female, no siree. The sheriff lounged against the door, neglectfully rolled a smoke, while the indignated rider had his say. When Bill paused to regain his breath, Pat held up a restraining hand. Now you quit running off at the mouth, he said soothingly, and listen. That there's Phyllis Ford, Pete's niece. He left her the Mirage mine. She's got the location map. There's only one thing wrong with it. The mine ain't there. But she's sure hell-bent to go take a look-see. I figure one night out in the hills that'll cure her. You can drift along and keep her out of trouble. And when you hit town again, your case is dismissed, lack of evidence. But, the sheriff went on, if you crave to stick to the schooler for 30, maybe 60 days, perhaps Judge Brimham will hear your case. Well, Bill, that's your funeral. Drunk and disorderly's only 5 days or a $5 fine, and you know it, you old catawampus. I already served 3. Well, you also threatened homicide, murmured Pat. The judge will maybe want to dish out 6 months. Bill's wrathy features suddenly dissolved into a wide grin. You win, you doggone old wolf. Let me out of here. I gotta shave and get my duds together. If that fat hog of a liveryman's been short feeding my buckskin, I'll be dumping him into the water trough. Pat unlocked the cell door, and Bill stepped out, his eyes bright with anticipation. I sure crave a mouthwash. My throat's kind of dry like a bucket of cinders. You start another fracas with Todd, admonished Sheriff. I'll have the judge commit you to the state pen. Bill's wide mouth quirked. Oh, don't talk to me that way, you bad man, or I'll tell the teacher. He jerked his Stetson down over his eyes and lagged on towards the main street with wide shoulders swinging gauntly. A wide-eyed, piebald pony hit town at a fast canter, trailed by drifting dust. quirt looped around her wrist, the girl swung easily in the big stock saddle. Yellow as ripened wheat, her hair was carelessly thrust into a stiff-brimmed sombrero. She was clad in mannish gray shirt and overalls, and a gun belt circled her waist. Tanned golden brown, her face was not pretty, but held a vivid beauty that accentuated by eyes dark, untamed as a wildcat's. At sight of Bill's squat figure passing the Jewel Hotel, her full red lips parted with quick surprise. She released a shrill whoop, and the quirt stung the piebald's rump. The animal leapt forward. With ease she yanked it to a sliding stop at the hitching rail beside the thick-set rider, smothering him with pebbles and dust.
"How come they let you out of the corral?"
she demanded in vibrant, throaty voice.
"The sheriff give me a job,"
explained Bill with straight face. "Under a gun. Gotta ride herd on a schoolmarm."
"Are you loco?"
"It's the darn truth, ma'am. That gal craves to hunt the Mirage Mine." Mommy Rik Straw leaned forward over her pony's head and sniffed suspiciously.
"Well, I can't smell no liquor," she told the piebald, "but he's gotta be drunk or loco."
"Ain't bathed my tonsils in 3 days," declared Bill.
"This schoolmarm, is she a good looker?"
Bill's features ceased in comic disgust. "Cross my heart, Mommy, she's homelier than a cow barn. Ain't got no more looks than a broody hen, and she wears blinkers. Pat says one day on the trail and she'll hightail her for back east." Todd, Rik Straw's sister, kept a tight rein on the nervous piebald. Bill frowned as he eyed its foam-flecked mouth. "A rider like you got no right to use a spade bit. You're driving that horse crazy."
"I'll choose my own bits, thank you."
Irritation edged her husky tones. She rammed the rowels into the pony's flanks, and the animal sprang forward. Balancing in the saddle without effort, the girl raised her right hand.
"So long, nursemaid,"
she flung over her shoulder.
"and grease that gun handle. Ton says next time he's comin' a smokin'."
In the shaded lobby of the Jewel Hotel, a girl in poke bonnet and high-button shoes heard the exchange and peeked at the speakers. Behind big steel spectacles, her blue eyes sparkled. When Mommy Rik Straw spurred away and Bill drifted on, she sprang to her feet and approached Shackle-Teeth Spenson, the clerk, yawning behind the showcase that served as a desk.
"Where can I buy a man's shirt and jeans and a gun?"
she inquired, lips set into a tight line. End of chapter 4.